Hey, Adam Lewis here, and in this episode of the Deer IQ podcast, we're going to look at how to re-find bucks. If you've ever had a buck just disappear, vanish, you've lost hope, you've wondered if he's dead and gone, well, there actually is a chance you could re-find him. We're going to look at how to do that and potentially put your tag on him in this episode. We're going to look at 4 things you need to consider before you try doing that, and 5 skills you need to re-find a buck, and in the end, we're going to look at your best case scenario for doing just that. It's all in this episode of the Deer IQ podcast.
Welcome to Deer IQ, here to help you hunt smarter, elevate your approach, and consistently tag exceptional whitetail. Whether you're just starting out or a longtime hunter targeting mature bucks, this is your edge. We bring you proven tactics, expert insights, and unfiltered conversations with high-level hunters who just get it done. Guiding you through it all is veteran hunter and strategist Adam Lewis, helping you spot what others miss, fine-tune your focus, and unlock your full hunting potential. So let's raise your deer IQ. Here's your host, Adam Lewis.
Okay, if you're watching this, you probably had a buck disappear, or think back to a time when you did and you wondered where this buck went. I can think of a bunch of deer in my 34 years hunting that have disappeared, and some that reappeared, some that I put my tag on, and some that just vanished like ghosts and never knew what happened to them. Some of those are a bit haunting, but there is a chance if a buck disappears that you can put your tag on them. So let's dig into that here, how you do that. But we're going to look at 4 key things to consider beforehand, before you put a bunch of time and effort into that, which is what it is. And we're talking a specific buck here. This is, you have a target buck or one that you specifically want to shoot, and he's disappeared. If you just want to shoot any buck, this really isn't as much of an issue. But we're talking about one specific deer. If they just all of a sudden are gone, what can you do? Let's start with 4 things you need to consider. These are factors that can really determine your success of refinding this deer or not. And I'll just say this up front, guys. It's not easy. It's not a guaranteed thing, but these are things to consider and then things you can do to really up your odds of potentially doing that. Now, the first thing that you need to consider, which is a huge limitation, is how much acres you have to hunt. Okay, when you look at these studies of buck ranges, how far they typically travel in their lives, and there's different types of bucks. We'll talk about those in a second. But if we just look at the averages of a home range of a buck, and this can vary greatly with terrains, with parts of the country. Okay, but just for sake of discussion here, the average is around 640 square acres, give or take. That's a square mile. That's quite a bit of terrain, and some are less. Some are actually more than that. But let's just talk about that as a number and an average, right? 640 acres. That is quite a bit. And if you think about where you hunt, especially if this is private, that's only just going to be a little sliver of his range where he normally travels, right? And so having these boundaries, these no trespassing signs, really get in the way of us refinding bucks. These deer do not understand fences. They don't understand no trespassing signs. They're just moving where they want to for certain reasons. And if he just happens to move a little bit, maybe he was making his core home on the property you hunt. Let's say it's 40 acres or even 80 acres or even more than that. That is just a little piece of the land that he roams in. And if he decides to move just a little bit, he's now out of your ability where you hunt. That's a huge factor to consider when you start targeting one specific buck. You're really hemmed in by property lines, and he is not at all. He does not understand those at all. So that's really something to consider, is how much acreage you have. Even if you have 640 acres, a square mile that's all yours, which most people do not, what are the chances that his whole range is actually on it? He's still going to overlap and go outside of your hunting area. So that's a huge thing to consider. The size of the land you have to hunt, that just is going to really limit you in your ability to potentially refine them. That's one thing to consider. Related to that, number 2 is what I call the public land advantage. Now, unless you have a ton of land, most hunters do not. Public land can be a huge advantage in this area because of what I just mentioned. This idea of, being limited by boundaries. And if you hunt and consider hunting bigger areas, yeah, there can be some really good bucks on 10-acre pieces, 100-acre pieces, what have you, which most of us hunt. And, in the Midwest in particular, I think around 90% of deer are taken on private land. So that's the majority of the hunting. But if you consider public land, there are some huge chunks of public land that have square miles of cover. So if you can get on a buck in those areas, property boundaries might not limit you near as much. The chunks that connect or what have you, that really opens up your ability to actually refine a deer that has relocated a little bit within that 640 acres or so of his potential range. So where you hunt really should factor into your decision of putting a bunch of time and a bunch of effort into trying to refine a deer. And some people get real obsessive with that, and that's cool, and that's what we're assuming here, right? You're trying to refine this deer, but how much area you have is a huge factor. And so when you start hunting an area, that can be considered up front. Is this a big enough chunk that if a deer moves, if I find a deer I really want to hunt, if he moves a little bit, can I move with him? Can I refine him in that way? That's a huge factor to really consider up front, and also where you're at and where he is with you hunting him. Another alternative here is if you hunt private, if you have enough permission pieces in a large area that you can kind of string together. Like if you really know the people in the area, you have a lot of permissions here and there, like a patchwork of sorts of permissions, that really opens the door. But if you're stuck to one little chunk of land in a sea of stuff that you cannot hunt, again, that really limits you. That's where big chunks of public can really come in handy, or just getting really getting to know the neighbors and getting a lot of permission in a patchwork of an area as much as possible. That is something to consider, and that is something that can really help you if you have more and more permission in places to try to refine a deer. Okay, the third thing to consider is, when I'm talking about that range, that general range, is buck personalities. Now, we had some previous podcasts where we talked about this in an MSU deer study. They found that bucks have two basic personalities. We have sedentary bucks that have a specific one home range, and then we have mobile bucks, which don't have one home range. They have a couple that they go back and forth to. Some bounce back and forth a lot, and some are just shift from one range to another, and these could be miles apart. So considering the buck, if you don't know much about this deer that you're after, you don't know if he's a sedentary buck or a mobile buck. That is super important to know, and trying to figure that out. If he's a sedentary buck, which about 2/3 are, he's going to be much easier to kill because he's going to just stay within that one area. Even though it's a pretty big area, he's going to stay within that area and probably be easier to refine. A mobile buck, about 1/3 of the population in their studies, with a mobile personality, they're going to bounce back and forth. And so what's your ability going to be to find one over here, his home range, during the summer, let's say, and then fall, winter, he's way over here a couple miles? Will you be able to do that, again, with where you have permission to hunt or with public land pieces? That's something to really consider, the type of buck. Those mobile bucks are going to be harder to find. And we've all probably heard stories or even had this where you have a deer on camera, then all of a sudden he shows up at your buddies a few miles away. That might be a mobile buck. And if you don't know where he's spending his time, if it is a mobile buck, you could be just spending your whole season trying to hunt a buck that's actually living way off somewhere else, and he's going to be there through the whole hunting season. And you probably all also experienced bucks entering where you can hunt that you didn't know about. They just kind of came out of nowhere, and that could be one of those mobile bucks coming in, at a certain time. They tend to do it at certain times a year where they either disappear or come in. That could be a mobile buck that came into your area. So when you're focused on one single buck, if he's sedentary or mobile, is knowing that is a huge factor. Huge factor. If he's mobile, you're going to have to totally relocate and find his new range. If he's sedentary, you're just going to have to look within that known home range. He's somewhere within that. Where within that, he's just hiding from you pretty well. So buck personalities really make a big difference. And I will say here, this is outside of the rut. We know the rut, it can be just chaos. It's harder to predict deer during the rut. It's a whole nother thing where they could just up and move and be bouncing all over the place. So that is another thing to consider, that the rut is not going to factor into your decision making with one of these bucks and refinding them. That is going to be tough to do during that time period.
Every hunter has blind spots and weaknesses holding them back. What are yours? The Deer IQ Test 360 is our complete hunting strategy and skills assessment, designed to uncover the holes in your approach, fix them fast, and refocus your efforts on exactly what gets results. It's quick, insightful, and delivers personalized suggestions based on your unique hunter profile. If you want to consistently tag better whitetail, the Deer IQ Test 360 is where to start. Take it now, linked below or at deeriq.com.
And we talk public land hunting, how it can be good, but it's super challenging, especially in high pressure areas. I've done that pretty exclusively the last 15 years with a lot of success. And if you want help with that, we actually do that here at Deer IQ. We do a public land analysis, and that is where we dive deep into your area. We really break it down, and we come up with a plan that you can implement to have much more success and be much more consistent on your public land. So if that interests you, check that out below and sign up for that. Okay, the fourth thing to consider of refinding a buck is how much history you have with them. And this one's super important. If you don't have any history with this deer, you'll really be guessing about where he might be. In times of the year, like I said, we got sedentary bucks, mobile bucks. Both of those have certain tendencies certain times of year, especially the mobile bucks that just appear and disappear. But if you have history from years past, we're talking past years, from trail cameras, from observations, you should be able to predict what he's going to do this year. Deer will typically show up at the same place and same time year after year after year within a day or two. It's pretty crazy. And I've done this multiple times on deer where I'll look at past year's history and figure out where I should be to meet up with that deer. And I've done that. But if you do not have that, then you're really going to struggle with that process. Not having intel to do that puts you at a major disadvantage. But if you have that historic data, that is a ticket to refinding deer, because they're basically telegraphing what they're going to do, and you know that ahead of time. So look back through those trail camera pictures. Think about observations you've had of when and where, exact dates and times, and start collecting that this year for next year, because you don't know that next year you might run into this scenario where, oh, this buck I saw last year that wasn't a shooter, next year will be a shooter, and that information from this year will really potentially come in handy next year if you struggle with getting on that deer or if that deer disappears. Historic data is huge, which is why you should be always running trail cameras, always documenting everything you see and do. Date and time, conditions, all those things play into that, so you can leverage that in the future. So do you have history on this deer or not? If you don't, that's a lot tougher. If you do, that's really going to help you to refine that deer. Okay, so those are just some things to consider in doing this. You have to weigh how much time you have to do this, how much effort you're willing to put in to do this. If you're willing to potentially burn a tag just focusing on one deer and trying to track that one deer down, is it worth it to you or not? That's something to consider, but those are 4 things to really think about to help you make that decision. Now, if you do decide that you definitely want to refine this deer and you're just focused on him, okay, here are 5 skills that you really need to leverage to help you do that. Okay, the first skill is glassing. Now, if you're in the middle of hunting season, this can be a tough one that a lot of people uh, don't like to do. And it's because we want to be in the woods hunting. We feel like being in the woods hunting is going to uh, be how we catch back up to this buck. But if you don't have any information about where you should be hunting him, that's actually the worst thing you can do, right? So you need to take a step back. And if you are in an area where you can see any distance at all and start doing some observations long distance, that scouting part of this from a large scale will help you refine a deer much quicker. If you're hunting, deep in the woods somewhere, you can only see so much. You're only seeing a little bit, you're only observing a little bit. And by stepping back and starting to glass fields again, like maybe you would in the summer, you can really start eliminating certain areas and get on potentially a deer much, much quicker. So taking a step back, stopping hunting, again, seems counterproductive, but if you can really cover some miles in this process, you can maybe find out where he is. You can say, hey, maybe he's living on somebody else's private and there's no way you can hunt him at this point. That is good information to know, right? Or you can find maybe he moved to a piece of public or wherever it might be. You need that information. And so taking a step back and glassing is a great way and a quick way, probably the quickest way to get that information, even in the middle of season. Be able to put down your bow, your gun, and start scouting again to get that information you need so you know when and where to actually hunt this deer. That's a huge help in what you need to do. Try glassing. The second skill, called a skill, is using and utilizing trail cameras effectively. Now, this one isn't as effective as glassing because cameras are in such a small area. But if you have even a handful of cameras that you can spread out, if you have a patchwork of area you can cover, or even just one property, if you're trying to find from one side to the other property where a deer might be, deploying those in a strategic way can really give you some good information. The more cell cameras you have, the better, because the more you're traipsing around the woods in the middle of season to check SD cards, you're making an impact, right? So you have to be real strategic about it, where you're putting them. You should focus on food sources, and also, strict, tight funnels to help you get the most out of these trail cameras. But again, you got to think about, how intrusive you're going to be in doing this or not. But these can really give you the piece of the puzzle that you need. On many times, I have, because of trail cameras, gotten that piece of that clue that I needed to really help me hone in on a deer and get a real strategic hunt. So they can be really good things if you spread them out. But again, they're just seeing a small window, right? But they can be invaluable if placed properly. So again, focus on food sources. If you're having a hard time finding a deer, depending on the time of year, scrapes potentially, if it's pre-rut, especially even after the rut, sometimes they will reopen scrapes up, and just strict funnels where deer have to move through to try to get an idea where that deer is. Now, when you do this, you need to pay attention to the time of day the deer is showing, because again, you want to find the place that you can potentially hunt this deer in daylight. If you're getting a bunch of night pictures, well, at least you're back on the deer if they totally disappeared. But that isn't a place you can hunt them. You're going to have to keep tracking down to try to figure out, where is this deer now in daylight? Okay, and you can start moving cameras and honing in to figure out where they're coming from if it's at night, and where they're actually active in daylight. That's what you have to try to figure out. The third skill is working your network. This is a hugely overlooked one that I've used several times that have led to me taking a deer, and that is other people. It could be landowners, it could be random people, random strangers that you talk to that have observed a deer. Um, like I said, several times, this has helped me. One such example that I'm going to bring up here to prove this point, and it kind of shows some of the others, is a buck that I shot a few years ago in Ohio. First, I knew where to hunt him from the previous year's information. Talk about historic data. I knew this buck showed up at a particular ridge, a saddle in this ridge, at a certain time frame. The next year, I hunted him the first time during that time frame at that location, and I had an encounter with him. I had him at 8 yards. I actually passed this buck and regretted it, right? It was this really big 10-point. There was a bigger one that I'd seen on camera, but I really regretted that. He was a great buck. But that was because of historic information. He showed up at the same place and same time. Well, I decided after that I would shoot him. I really wanted to. And after the rut, after mid-November, and I had to leave, he disappeared. Didn't know where he was. He was not showing on any of my cameras. Well, the landowner wound up seeing him on the opposite side of the property in late season. And he had moved. He was hitting a different food source. But that visual helped me know to where to put some cameras where I confirmed that it was actually him. He just said it was a big buck, right? So I knew a totally other side of the property where I needed to start looking, put cameras. I confirmed it was him, and then I moved in and was actually able to take him. And those are a couple things, the historic data and, utilizing your network, other people's eyeballs to help you do that. Another time I used this was actually in Missouri, and I hunted some public land that I had never been to. And I actually wound up calling around and talked to a local there who gave me a tip on deer they'd been seeing. And that tip led directly to me taking a deer out there. It's from other people, maybe just not even hunters. Maybe it's a farmer, maybe it's a landowner, maybe it's whoever else that are seeing deer because it's where they live. They can tip you off. So utilizing your network or increasing your network of people around your community can really help you get on a deer because they see stuff all the time. Driving down the road, in their backyard, or whatever it might be, that is huge. That can really help you a ton. So maximize that and utilize that network. Another thing to really focus on is increasing your patchwork of land. In that square mile area, let's say a buck has a square mile home range. It's a sedentary buck. He's going to be in there somewhere. That could vary wildly, right? There's a lot of space in there for a buck to be. The more permission you have within his home, his range, the better chance you have of refining him, right? So knocking on doors, really working at getting more access, because if you just have access to one little chunk, one little 40-acre piece, that's really going to limit you. If he's not there, if you pressure it too much, you make one mistake, whatever it might be, all he has to do is cross the property line, and that's it. You have zero hope at that point, right? So maximizing your patchwork of permission, or if you're near public, getting familiar with that is super important, because the more of those pieces you can connect, the better luck you have at refining that deer. So you can glass, you can really get out those trail cameras and utilize those. You can utilize word of mouth, talking to other people. You can really expand your territory there, so you have more options and places to do those things. The last thing is, if you still don't have it narrowed down to where you need or should be hunting this deer, if you haven't refound him, is if you have clues, which is the observation sit. If you think he's in a particular area and you're not sure, hanging back but doing like an observation hunt, it is potentially a good way to refine deer. And I've done that several times or got on deer because of that. So sitting in an area, it's kind of like glassing, but you're hunting, right? So you're hanging back, you're not going diving in there, but you're hanging back in observational positions where you can see a lot, observe a lot, and hopefully hone in and get a little closer to where he might be. That's something you can try if you're not quite sure, but you want to get visual observation of a deer. All right, so those are some things to consider, to think about before you spend a bunch of time and effort into trying to refine a deer. If it's really that special of a deer, those are some things you can do to help refine that deer. But here's some clues. Here's your best bets, I think. And again, this is outside of the rut. The rut is kind of guessing, right? But here are your best bets if you really consider it. We haven't talked about the pressure of the area. I think there's a big difference between high pressure and low pressure areas and your ability to refine them and where you should look within that area. If it's a high pressure area, and we'll define that as 100 or more every 80 acres, those deer are going to key in on the most important thing for those deer is cover. So you should start keying in on the thickest, nastiest cover with the least amount of hunters. That is where I would focus my search to refine a buck. That is most important for them. They have to stay alive, right? So you're really going to focus on cover and terrain that has really good cover to try to find or refine that deer. That's your best bet of where that deer might be. If it is in a high pressure area, if it's really low pressure hunting, well, I would focus on food. Like food is probably going to be the biggest thing. And if it's during the rut, yeah, breeding, where are the does right now? But that could change so much, right? But you could focus on those does. But otherwise, what is the highest quality food right now? Where is that? That is probably your biggest clue as to where that deer may have shifted to within your range. I know here in the Midwest right now, corn has been taken off, but there's still a few pieces standing here and there. And that can be huge for finding a concentration of deer and particular deer. They're going to go to the food, so cut corn, they're going to love that. But if corn is still standing, that can be some of the best cover out there. And that's going to hold deer. It's cover, it's also food. And that's somewhere where there can be a real hot spot and where you could potentially refine a buck. So high pressure, it's all about cover. Low pressure, it's all about the best food in that area. And that can potentially help you refine that deer if you put all those things together. It's still not easy. And at the end of the day, you've got to decide, is this worth burning a whole season over or not? And if you decide to do that and you commit, that's great. Those things will probably help you. Or just, decide up front that where your stopping point is. At what point will you give up and take another buck that's really a good buck? An example of that is me here this year in Michigan. There was a big buck showing up in my backyard plot. He showed up there twice. And he disappeared about 3 weeks before gun season. And I was going to put in a little time and try to hunt him, but I didn't have much hope. With the amount of people around that hunt, there's a good chance that somebody shot him. And so that's another thing to consider. How heavily hunted is the area you're in that deer can actually survive through a season? Some areas it's much easier than others to think they're going to live, right? And so I made a decision that after a certain amount of time, I assumed he's dead. Maybe he'll show back up, but to me, it was more about meeting a criteria than one specific deer. So that's a decision you have to make to really, think about if you're going to focus on one deer. And don't forget, all this data you collected on this deer could help you next year if he makes it through. So just because you decide to take maybe a different deer this year doesn't mean that that won't help you if he's still alive next year. Refind him, because now you have the historic data I was talking about. So those are some things to consider and ways to potentially refind a buck. What do you think? Did I miss anything? Put it in the comments below if you have a way that you've refound a deer. All right, and next time we continue our series in public land hunting, the details that make a difference. As we kind of wrap up this series, you won't want to miss our ending, and I'll see you then.